Hi there, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Tracy. I'm an upcycler and I love taking thrifted items, discarded items, and turning them into one-of-a-kind pieces, clothing, purses, accessories. Now I have quite a few videos on my channel and I wouldn't necessarily call them tutorials, more of DIYs, because I've never used a pattern unless I've made it for myself and shown you how to do it. I can't tell you how many yards of fabric to buy. I am just taking dresses and blankets and shirts and turning them into something fun. Now, I recently thrifted this dress and my first thought was cut it down the middle. Let's make a fall duster. Well, when I started pulling materials for it, this might get kind of heavy. So I'm thinking it will turn out more like a boho patchwork coat. I don't know what it's going to look like at this point. You probably saw the thumbnail to this video and you know how it turns out. It could be a monstrosity. It could be magnificent. I don't always know. And let that inspire you a little bit to be brave and give something a try. There are no guarantees. Upcycling takes a little bit of engineering, a little bit of artistry, a little bit of guts. So let's get rolling. My dress is a high cotton blend and it doesn't have a lining and it has some embroidery. And I have a nice little line right down the center. And I want to cut it up the center and I'm not going to have to do any measuring because it's already there for me. Now, you could do this with a dress, but robes. Look for really cool robes to do this too. Then you can avoid having to cut down the center. So I'm just going to cut it up the center. Okay, now I have the front all cut open. And now what I want to do is work on the sleeves a little bit. And these are narrow. And I want more of a bell sleeve, a wide sleeve at the bottom. And so I am going to find the center, which I've got it made here. Again, I can just go down the center of this gold strip. And then when I get to the top of the shoulder, I'm going to seam rip this shoulder piece about 1 inch of it. There I have one sleeve cut open. Now I'm just going to go on the inside here at that shoulder, and it has a nice stitch right along here. I'm just going to seam rip about 1 inch of that. Okay, so here's my dress. Here's the sleeve. It's cut open, and right at the top of the sleeve I basically made a hole, and now I can finish cutting that sleeve open. Okay, so I want to put a triangle insert into this cut area. I know I want my triangle to be 12 inches at the bottom, but I don't know how high it is yet. I can't just measure like this because when you spread out a sleeve like this, it gets shorter. So what I like to do is just take my slit, spread it out the 12 inches along some sort of straight edge, and then I measure how high, I know this is 12 inches because that's how long or wide the sleeve is. Then I measure how high it is from that straight edge to the top of the cut. And I get 17 inches. I'm going to add ½ inch for seam allowance. Now I'm going to make a pattern for my triangle. And so I just got a piece of packing paper. I get mine at Walmart, but wrapping paper makes nice pattern paper as well. I folded it in half. And then I'm measuring up the fold 17.5 inches and made a mark. And then I measured over 1/4 inch. I want my triangle to be ½ inch at the top. It's folded, so I only go halfway, which is 1/4 inch. Now I want it to be 12 inches at the bottom. Since it's folded, I only need to go 6 inches because once I cut that, that'll double and be the 12. So I'm just going to take that dot at the bottom, line up my yardstick, line it up to that 1/4 of an inch at the top, draw a straight line. And now I'm just going to go over a little bit. And all I have to do is cut that out. Now I have this fun pattern skirt that I thrifted. Actually, the same day I got the dress. And I am just going to cut this open on the side. This will be my triangle insert for the dress. Now I turn the skirt over on the opposite side because it's a lot easier to see where you're drawing. And I just trace this triangle 2 times. And now I'm going to cut them out. Okay, now I just have to attach this triangle to this cut. And we have it open right here at the top. And I want the seams on the outside. Now, if you want the seams on the outside, put the wrong sides together. If you want the seams on the inside, put right sides together. So I am going to put wrong sides together. Now, I won't pin this or anything. I will just take the top part of one side and line up my triangle with the top and just sew this down the side. And when I'm at my machine, I'll sew, line it up, sew, line it up till I'm all the way at the bottom. And I'll use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm using gold colored thread. I am going to use a jeans needle on this entire project. Okay, so I only sewed one side to the arm because I still want to put a patch on the sleeve, and it's way easier to do with the sleeve open than with it closed. So I did the same to the opposite arm. I only sewed one side, and we'll close that up later. Now, tip here, be sure to start sewing always at the top down. Don't start at the bottom and go up, because if it's going to be misaligned, you'd rather have it misaligned at the bottom and not at the top. Okay, so now I just went to my storeroom and pulled out some fabrics, some blazers, all kinds of different patterns. This is an Italian wedding blanket that I got off eBay. It's vintage, very beautiful. Here's a blazer with a floral pattern. This shirt, I don't know, I may or may not use a lot of this. So another blazer, part of that skirt still. Another blazer. I may go pull more things out, but right now I'm just going to sort of start puzzling, piecing this together and trying to figure out what I like. Okay, so the first thing I decided to do was to add a wide border at the bottom of, I'm going to call it a coat now, not a dress. It's transforming. So I cut a border off of that Italian wedding blanket, 11 inches tall, from here to the bottom of the fringe. And I am just going to sew it along the bottom in 2 places. I'm going to line it up at the edge. This is actually the front side. And I am going to sew it down the side. And I'm going to sew it at the top of this fringy border, because this little fringy border will extend past the actual dress. So I want to line it up like this, and I will sew that first. And I will just use a fairly small straight stitch all the way down, lining that up. Now, a little tip here, I had to cut this fringe. Now, this is vintage, and it's a little bit fragile. So what I had to do was just run a zigzag stitch along the edge of this fringe so that it doesn't completely come unraveled. It'll fray a little bit, but it should hold its shape. So once I get the bottom sewn on, along the top of that fringe, I will go to the top and sew that on with a straight stitch as well. And I'm not going to pin any of this, but you're welcome to. It's just easier for me to maneuver it if it's not pinned. Okay, I have the bottom piece all sewn on. And when I got to the back, I had extra fabric up here and I had to do some pleating to make that fit. Now, that may be because of the curve of the dress. Maybe start at the top and maybe mark where you want it, 11 inches up or however you want it. And sew the top first and let the bottom kind of lay where it needs to and sew it. But I kind of like that pleating in that dimension. And what would Bob Ross say? Maybe a happy accident, but I think it's super cute. Now this little square piece came with the wedding blanket, and I am going to put it about right there. What I need to do is take this off my mannequin and just lay it out flat and pin it nicely. But I'm not going to sew it because I want to add some patches, and some of the patches I may want to tuck a corner underneath of here, and then I'll just take a couple pins out. So I just want to pin it so that I know what shape is going there. Okay, before I get too far, I am just cutting out squares, some big, some small, some rectangles out of all those fabrics that I showed you on the table, and just playing with them. They are temporarily sort of pinned so that I can move them around if I want to. When I get everything pinned on, I'm about maybe 2/3 of the way full. I haven't really done anything to the front yet. And I did a lot of the back, a little bit on the sleeve. You know, you do the sizes you want. I have two huge ones down here, and I'm just looking to see what I like. I want it to look really busy and really fun. So that's what I'm doing right now. Okay, I have everything where I want it, all the patches, and I'm going to bring this in closer so that you can see. I'll spin it around so you can see the top and the bottom where I place things, but you know, you place things where you want. Basically, I just wanted to fill it up, but there are some original dress showing through. Now I will lay this out on my table, pin those more securely, and I will do a straight stitch to sew all these on, and I'll stay close to the edge. You can do a zigzag, whatever you want. Now I didn't put a lot of patches down the front center because I have this trim from the wedding blanket that I am going to put down this side and then this side. And I will also be doing pockets and a couple other little things, but I'll get all those sewn on and I'll bring it in closer so you can see where things are placed. Now I have all the patches sewn on, and I have this sewn on. How I sewed this big diamond on was I used my largest zigzag stitch and I used red thread, and I just went along the edge of the entire piece except for the fringe. Now what I want to do is sew a piece of trim along the top of this bottom piece to hide those raw edges. I have this sort of burgundy gimp trim, and I'm going to sew it right along that raw edge. I'll start at the front, one end, and sew it all the way over till I get to the opposite end. And I'm going to use a red zigzag stitch. Okay, so now I want to make a couple pockets for the front. They'll be U-shaped, and it's a super simple pattern to make, and I'll show you how. First, I cut out a slight rectangle. This is 9.5 inches tall and 9 inches across. And then I folded it in half. Okay, and then what I do, well, this is a tin. It's 7 inches across. I am just going to line that up with the corner on the cut end right there. The folded end is on this side. I'm going to trace around it and cut it out. And there you have your U-shaped pattern. So then I took my pattern and went to my Italian wedding blanket and traced around and cut out 2 pieces. And then I went to one of the blazers that had a floral pattern, and I did the same thing. So now I have 4 pieces. Okay, now I'm going to sew these 2 pieces together. I already pinned this one, and I'll show you what I do. I just put right sides together, and I pin at the corners. And actually, I'm going to pin all the way around, leaving about a 3-inch gap at the top so that we can turn it right side out. So I'll put a pin there to remind me to stop there, and I'll probably start about here. So I'll get that pinned all the way around. Okay, I have this all the way pinned except for a gap right here at the top. So now I'm going to just sew these together, and I'm going to start at this pin, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, a straight stitch. I need to pin that a little better. It's kind of cockeyed. But anyway, I'll start here, go all the way around and across here and stop right here. Now I have these both sewn, and I'm going to snip off the corner. This is all so that when I turn it right side out, it lays smoothly. And then anytime you have a rounded curve, you need to snip that before you turn it right side out. And I snip about every 1/2 inch, just close to that line I just sewed, but not through, of course. So I'll go around both of these, doing these little snips. Okay, so now I can turn it right side out. My hole's kind of small, so it's going to take me a minute. Okay, now I'm going to poke out those corners. Okay, before I start pressing it, that open hole that we still have, I'm going to tuck those in so that they line up nicely with the rest of it, and I'm going to press that first. Now, if your fabric is heat sensitive, or if you don't know how to handle the iron, just cover it up with a tea towel. Okay, so now that hole is nice and tidy, I'm going to go to my machine, and I'm going to just do a little top stitch from here to here, because my thread will not show on here. But if your thread shows, you'll want to do the whole thing a top stitch so you don't just see like a small space of thread. But I'm going to go get that hole closed up. Okay, now I have beautiful lined pockets. Now it's time to pin them on to the coat. Okay, so when I do pockets, I always put my garment on because of trial and error. I've had my pockets too low, too high, and so I want to test out where my hand will be comfortably. So maybe about right there. And I'm only going to pin one pocket on because I'll take it off and I'll lay it flat, and I will just line the other pocket up laying on my table with the one that I pinned. Otherwise, it's too hard to look down and try to figure out, is that even with that? It's a lot easier when it's laying on your table. See, I'm gonna have to play with this a little bit. I want my pocket slanted a little bit. So I think about right there. Now I'll put another pin in it. I'm going to go look in the mirror and pretend my hands are in it and fine tune it a little bit. Okay, so this is the one I pinned at the top. Now I'm just taking my other pocket and just eyeballing it to see if it looks even. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'll stick a couple pins in this at the top, and then I'm going to pin it all the way around, not at the top, on both sides. Now that I have these pinned on, I'm going to go to my machine and sew them on. I'll start here, use my gold colored thread, a large zigzag stitch, stay close to the edges, and go all the way around to here. Okay, pockets are done. So cute. Now I want to finish off the sleeves, and I want big chunky cuffs made from that Italian wedding blanket. Okay, so I measured the bottom of my sleeve. It's still open, and from one end to the other I have 24 inches. So I cut two pieces 26 inches long. Now that gives me room for error and room to trim. I'd rather have it be a little bit too long than a little too short, and it is 12 inches tall. Okay, just so you know, this is a little bit of an experiment, so cross your fingers with me. But what I want to do is have this look like a folded over cuff with a finished edge. Now my two pieces do not match. This one has a bigger chunk of floral, and that's okay. It would have been nice if they did, but it might even be cuter if they don't. But the first thing I want to do is pick a side that will be the folded up cuff, up towards the top, and I'm choosing the flowers. So what I want to do is finish that edge. So I folded this over 1.5 inches and stuck a pin all the way down. And then I will do the same to this one. I will just measure 1.5 inches, stick a pin, and do that all the way down. Okay, so now I have that all pinned on both sides. Now I'm just simply going to take it to my machine and sew that closed, and I'm going to stay close to the edge using a fairly small straight stitch. Okay, here's my rectangle that I just sewed. Here's the folded end, and here's the raw edge. Here is my sleeve, all flared out. Now what I need to do is put my sleeve, I want the right side up. I want to be able to see that. Then I'm going to take the wrong side of my sleeve and lay it on the right side of the rectangle. And then I am just going to pin this all the way down. Okay, I have both sleeves all pinned. Now I'm just going to go to my machine and stitch it straight across with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a fairly small straight stitch. Okay, I have that all sewn at the bottom. Now what I want to do is finish sewing this triangle together down to, let's see if you can see this better. I want to sew this back together down to this thick wedding blanket. I will trim this after I get this sewn together. So remember how we sewed that triangle to one side, seams on the outside, wrong sides together? Now I'm going to go back and put this together and sew that opposite side. Now you can pin yours. I may pin mine just because it's getting a little more complicated now. And then I will sew it all the way down to this cuff. And then I will deal with this afterwards. So I'm going to get that sewn. I'm going to pin it first. I'm still pinning this triangle, but I just want to let you know if this cuff is complicated and it definitely is a few extra steps. You could just sew this triangle back together and you could put a ruffle at the end of your sleeve or some fringe. That would be a lot easier, but my heart is just set on this giant cuff, so we'll see how it works out. Okay, I just want to show you what it's looking like right now, because I know there's been a lot of close-ups and it might be a little confusing, but we have the sleeves all closed up, and I have these inside-out cuffs, and they will in a little while, in a little bit, be rolled up and be big cuffs. But what I need to do right now are the shoulders. Okay, here's one of the shoulders. Remember when we seam ripped that 1 inch? Now it's time to close that back up. Okay. Black fabric's kind of hard to see, but I turned it inside out. Here's my armhole, and here's that hole that we seam ripped right at the shoulder. Now, I don't know if you can see that little black stitch line right there. All we're doing is sewing back across that. I'm going to take a couple pins and close that hole back up. And then I am going to follow that original stitch line, start back a little bit to make sure I get that entire hole, and then just sew across it. Okay, now to finish up the sleeves. Now, my triangle is sewn to the top of my cuff, but this is not sewn yet. So what I want to do is just line that up where the sleeve meets the cuff, and then I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to lay it next to the bottom of the actual sleeve and just make a straight line, just as best as I can, from that edge of the sleeve down. Okay, see that blue line? Now I am going to pin along that blue line like this. And then once I get that all pinned, I'm just going to sew. Let me finish pinning here. Okay, so I have it pinned all along that blue line. Now I'm just going to go to my machine. I'll cut into this a little bit to make sure there's not a gap or a hole right there into the actual sleeve. And then I'll just sew down that blue line. And I'm going to sew it twice with the straight stitch just because this is so thick. Okay, so there's my blue line. Now I'm just going to trim the excess and get fairly close to that line. Okay, I love it. Everything I dreamed it would be. Okay, so I already rolled this one up. Now I need to roll this one up. And what I'll do is try it on and see what length I want it at on my arm. And once I get it perfect the way I want it, I am going to go back in and do a little bit of hand stitching in 4 spots. I will do them just a little stitch in and out a few times in 4 spots equally divided around the sleeve so that it stays up, but it doesn't, I don't want to sew it down. I want it to look like a cuff. So I'll try that on, see exactly where I want them. Okay, so I decided I want my cuff 6 inches tall. That will just give me a guide for when I'm doing a little bit of hand stitching around, make sure everything's 6 inches. Okay, sleeves done. I would say that's the hardest part. So maybe if you don't want to deal with all that, just leave the sleeves as they are, but I think they're cute. So I want to do a little bit of a closure, and I'm going to do sort of a short closure. I thought about doing those little eyelets, but then I'm cutting on one of my blazers and I saw these pretty upholstered buttons, covered buttons, and I decided I am just going to use these as my closure. I unbutton them here, and I am going to sew one on one side and one on the other, but I'll give you more of a close-up. It'll probably go the other way. Fun. Okay, so I have 2 of these, one with the buttons. They're 13 inches long and 2 inches wide. Here's the buttonholes. And I am going to sew these. I'm going to overlap the edge here 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to start right underneath this collar. So it will be like this, and I will pin that on so it doesn't shift around at my machine. And then I'm going to take the other one, go right underneath the collar, overlap 1/4 of an inch, and get that sewn on. And I'm going to use a zigzag stitch so that's nice and durable, because buttons will be functional and you want those strong. While I have you here at my machine, did you notice that I did a little zigzag stitch where I cut these off of the original blazer because that was a raw edge, and I just did a zigzag stitch so that it didn't come unraveled. Okay, there are the buttons. Now, the last thing I want to sew is this trim. Now, I am going to line it up. There's a seam right across here. Oh, there it is. There's a seam. I'm going to line it up with the seam, and then I'm going to stitch it, and this will be all zigzag stitch because this is kind of a gappy, kind of fragile trim, and I want to make sure I catch as much as possible. So I'll come along the collar underneath, but then when I get to the front, I'm going to cover that buttonhole stitching, and then I'm going to go all the way close to the edge, all the way down. And I'm going to have it go, I can't get this straight, all the way, if I have enough, to the bottom of this border, right down to that fringe. So I will get this sewn on. I will sew it in 2 places. I'll sew it along as close to the edge as I can get it. And then I'm going to have to go back in about 1.5 inches and do another zigzag stitch just so that it lays nice and doesn't get all wonky on me. So I will get one sewed on that side, and I have another one that I will sew along this side. Okay, all done sewing. If you are a tactile person, you would love this. It feels so nice. Now what I'm going to do is take it off my mannequin. I'm going to leave it buttoned, turn it inside out, wash it in cold water on a gentle cycle, and then I'm going to hang it over one of my laundry drying racks out in the sun. Now there are a lot of raw edges around the patches and things like that. I may have to trim some excessive fraying. I'll get that done. Now when I sold, I always washed things that were going to fray because I wanted the fraying to happen on my watch so I could trim any extras so they got a clear idea of what they're getting, what it would look like after it's washed. So I will get all that done and come back wearing it. Okay, here it is all done. It feels so rich and wonderful to me. Yeah, I'll show you more of the back. What out of that dress, right? Now I use that wedding blanket a lot on this, but you don't have to have a wedding blanket. But if you do get one, I get mine on eBay. They're kind of pricey, a little hard to find, but mine have paid for themselves over and over when I sold. I made this purse out of the same wedding blanket I used on this coat, and I have a tutorial for that. I'll put that in my link. But if you don't have one or don't want to get one, velvet. This is a dress that I thrifted. Same rich feel. Velvet dresses with patterns are something I always nab when I'm at the thrift store and I see something like that. Now, mine got very heavy, very coat-like, but what if you found, a lightweight robe? Maybe you don't want it. You know, it's not winter yet, but I know a lot of us are thinking about fall, but maybe a patterned robe and some lighter weight fabrics. You know, you can make it as long as you want, add some fabrics or a ruffle or some fringe, you know, a lot of alternatives. And at the thrift store, curtains, blankets, comforters, pants. There are a lot of fun patterned pants at my thrift store. Skirts. Have fun looking for patterns. They are everywhere in the thrift stores. So I'm going to slow this down a little bit, put this on my mannequin and give you a close-up of the details. And I thank you so much for watching.